The city is set to make a dent in the estimated 10,000 homes which lie abandoned in the city of Gary. The city has received $6.5 million from the $75 million the state received from the Hardest Hit Fund. First homes came down this week. To talk about it, we have Joe Van Dyke, who is Director of Redevelopment, and Brenda Scott Henry, who is Director of Green Urbanism and Environmental Affairs for the City of Gary. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, you expect to take down as many as 1,000 homes out of the 10,000 homes that sit abandoned in the city. How do you pick which ones come down?
Sure. Well, there's sort of two flavors of demolition. You sort of have project-based demolition if we have an imminent development coming in, if there's a program partner who wants to clear an entire lot to do something. And then the other is more targeted for blight elimination and neighborhood stabilization. And so neighborhood stabilization is really the key for most of these properties. We look for the one or two abandoned homes on an otherwise stable block, and you try to remove them. One thing that we know is blight is very contagious, and once you have a blighted home on a property, there's a chance of the neighboring properties falling into disrepair.
So what is the common denominator between most of these homes that are on your list? I mean, what happened there?
Well, our demolition coordinator, Cedric Kirkendall, is very thorough. He knows the city like the back of his hand. And really the very first thing we looked for was the worst of the worst. Really bad eyesores, things that have been vacant and abandoned for a long time, things that have been burnt out, and again, things that sit on otherwise stable blocks. And so there are a lot of neighbors and a lot of residents in Gary who maintain their properties despite being next to these eyesores, and so those are the ones we targeted.
I've actually talked with Cedric Kirkendall, and it seems like the issue is not so much even that the city has maybe as many as 10,000 abandoned buildings, but the list continues to grow.
Right.
Even when you take some of them down, the city is still suffering from blight. Is there enough money here to turn that around?
Well, I don't think the 6.6 million will, it will make a dent into the demolition, but we know that it's a great start. And for that, we've targeted strategic neighborhoods where we've already have existing revitalization going on or redevelopment going on, and then we build around those. So we do the demolition around those areas, and then other areas where we might have a total burnout or it's unsafe, kids are taking those paths to school, those type of things.
So who's going to get these houses or get these lots once the houses come down and the buildings come down?
Sure. We've identified a lot of program partners who are interested, and I'll let Brenda go into greater detail about some of them.
So we have like the Fuller Center for Housing of Gary. We have Sojourner Truth. We have Broadway Area CDC.
Okay.
We have, of course, the Redevelopment Commission. And
the
then
Fuller Center, those are the folks that are trying to rehab some of the homes around the Jackson family home on Jackson Street. Okay.
So any property that's on that area that would require demolition, we would do the demolition for those sites, and then they will rebuild new homes. So we're doing infill housing. Some neighbors are just interested in maybe like the side lot program. We would give them that property. Once we do just a basic demolition and put some type of green infrastructure there, it could just be just some low-mow grass, fescue that we use, and then just give that to the adjacent neighbor. That increase our tax base, of course.
And nobody wants to see an abandoned house, but some of these abandoned lots, they can become just as much of an eyesore as the homes. How do you stop that from happening?
Well, what we did differently this time with our demolition program was to include some green specifications. So we talked with some consultants as well as engineers, and they provided us a seed mix that the contractors can use to plant. So we're looking at low-mow grass, native planting, depression in the center of that lot so that the water is maintained right on that lot, and also capture the rainfall from the adjacent lots.
All right,
So
some
we
of this
turn
can
it into
actually
a
be used
green.
for drainage
Right.
for the rest of the neighborhood.
Reduce flooding in the neighborhoods. It's a beautiful spot, no overgrowth of grass. And then we have additional funding that come along with this monies to do maintenance over a 2-year period.
Do you make sure, do you go through a process to make sure that you're not giving this land back to some of the people who might have allowed property to go for back taxes? the folks that have kind of really drawn down the property values in the city of Gary.
Sure. Again, the program partners are the end recipient, and of course, Redevelopment Commission is the largest. And in order to be eligible for the side lot program, which is the vast majority of the ways we divest ourselves of these properties, you have to be current on your taxes. So that's just a basic parameter in place to do that.
All right, so at least if you have back taxes somewhere else, you're not going to end up with one of these lots.
Correct.
Is this going to be expensive? Are you going to give these away, or how is this going to work?
The side lot program works where if you claim a homestead exemption on your property, so if that's your primary place of residence, we will give you the adjacent property so long as you pay taxes on it and are current on your taxes right now.
Do you have enough tools to handle? I mean, you've got money here to tear down some of these homes, but do you have enough tools to really solve the problem of blight in the city of Gary?
Well, I mean, that's a really large question, right? I don't think you could ever have enough tools to completely solve it, but you certainly go in the right direction. You sort of change the economics of the city, and you try to provide as many opportunities.
Let me drill down a little bit. I mean,
Sure.
Specifically with the tax sale. Other states have gotten rid of tax sales. They've gone to a system of land banks. I've gone out and talked to people in some of these neighborhoods, and they remember a time when neighbors tried to sell their homes, and they couldn't get any money for them whatsoever. Those homes now sit vacant,
Right.
or they've just maybe given it to a relative to move into it. But the homes really almost have no value in and of themselves.
Sure.
And a lot of those homes at one point have gone through our tax sale in Indiana. Is that something that really needs to change more dramatically than it has?
I think you need to give a real hard look at vacancy and wide-scale abandonment and the issues you just mentioned. I don't think the tax sale process is probably the most efficient, best way to do it. Especially because of the speculative nature that a lot of people have when they purchase large-scale tax liens and try to get some sort of reclamation value, if indeed those are redeemed. There are a lot of methods being used. I know the county's looking at land banks as a potential source.
Kind of on a small scale. They really don't have the laws here that you have in some other state.
Right.
You look at places like Detroit, where that's really how they get rid of these blighted homes. They package them
Sure.
together, and then they try to sell them to developers.
Sure, and we've spoken with people in Detroit. Cuyahoga County in Cleveland is sort of like the godfather of land banks. Genesee County, Flint, Michigan. We know a lot of folks at those places who have been working in the state legislature. Jim Merritt down in Indianapolis, who we've had on your radio program, is sort of championing that cause. So I think, the jury's still out on what's the best method to do it, but we are looking into it, and I think that a lot of communities in Indiana, particularly those hit with wide-scale abandonment, Muncie, South Bend, Fort Wayne, Gary, Hammond, are sort of looking at creative solutions.
It may work in different parts of the tax sale, that auctioning off of property may work in different parts of the state, but when you get into places like Gary or parts of Indianapolis, it's not as efficient. It doesn't.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's sort of an atypical real estate market, like you just mentioned. Some people can't sell their homes even if they're in perfect condition, right? Just because there's no market demand. So you sort of have to navigate that, and it's frankly a pretty new problem that we're sort of trying to solve. Wide scale, I mean, the jury's still out on a lot of methods that are being used. It's more efficient to do it, as they do in Detroit or Cleveland or Flint, but the jury's still out as far as how that stems the tide of abandonment.
And that's why the demolition is very strategic. It's focused on areas where we are putting other resources in for redevelopment. So you stabilize those areas where you have anchors, like your universities or the Methodist Hospital, or you have the baseball stadium. And so you have, in the Miller area, you have the lakefront. So you stabilize that neighborhood as best you can so that those residents that you have there don't leave.
How do you convince? I remember talking to one neighbor that was just out there cutting her grass, and she was cutting the grass for like half of the lots on the street. And talking about how she'd been there for 40 or 50 years, and she couldn't imagine selling her house. I mean, it's low taxes; she didn't have to move, but didn't think that that house was going to have a lot of value when she got ready to give it up for herself. How do you convince that person that this is going to change? The city is going to be different, and she's not going to be burdened with cutting all the neighbors' grass. That help is kind of on the way.
I don't know if we can really, well, that happens to us too. My husband, I live in an area where there are a lot of abandoned houses, but my husband maintains those lots. We're debating, we're struggling with determining whether we should leave his childhood home or should we go elsewhere? But we're definitely committed to the city, so we're not leaving out of Gary. But so we struggle with that, but we will. We just continue to maintain. You just have some really committed folks, the ones that are there. We've lost half of our population, so we know that we have more housing than we need in the city of Gary. So then we're looking at our infrastructure. Do we really need that many houses on that particular block, or do we need to relocate or expand upon our green spaces? And so those are the things that we're doing.
It's going to be a very long process.
Right,
but
it's
this
a
is
long process.
It's a
so.
multi-million-dollar start.
Yes.
Right.
So
Well,
we
that-
could put a green space in between there, that will manage stormwater, and that would make it okay. That would increase the homeowner's value a little bit, right?
Yeah. And for one block, that may be all that you need
Right.
to turn it around.
That's the thought.
All right, Joe Van Dyke, Director of Redevelopment, and Brenda Scott Henry, she's the Director of Green Urbanism and Environmental Affairs for the City of Gary. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.
you.